Hello, good evening, everybody. What's up? What's up? How y'all doing out there today? Thanks for joining us. We welcome you and bring your friends and family to join us at Fine and Taylor. So, hey, Tam, how are you?
I'm hungry and I want to eat my popcorn during the podcast.
Well, we're at episode 24. This is Sarcoidosis Awareness Month and autism. So, of course, last week we had a guest on talking about sarcoidosis awareness, and then tonight we have a special guest as well. So, Tammy, how was your weekend?
I was in the car, Tasha, coming to see you the entire weekend. I'm tired. I drove 8 hours and from Jersey to North Carolina, and coming back, I drove. Dewan and my cousin, we drove Route 81. I've never driven Route 81 from North Carolina. I'm a 95 South girl, right? But it was really good. It was it's farmland, so it's very placid, and it gets you ready to go back into the city because it calms you before you get back into the bricks and mortar.
Wow. Yeah.
How was your weekend, Tasha? I see all the baby gifts behind you.
So, guys, this weekend, as you know, was a baby shower, and all those gifts over there are for my little princess that's coming soon. And there is no way that I could have taken them out of this computer room right now and move all of them by myself.
She's moving on. My Tasha, just leave them right where they are before you get up a trip. So everybody knows you're with child. So congratulations to you and James.
Thank you.
Tasha is
So guys,
it was good seeing you this weekend.
It was a good surprise. Tammy came down here to North Carolina in Rockingham. You know, that's what they do, the race car racing and stuff, and surprised me. She told me she wasn't coming, but somehow her and my cousin Dewan surprised me and came down. So that was great. I was very surprised and was excited to see them, and I thank them for coming down and supporting me. Mm-hmm. But so that's how that went. We just got to open these presents up and make sure we get our bags ready to, go when baby decides she wants to come out into this world and say hi to everybody.
She'll come. Just give her time.
All right, guys. So enough about us. But we again thank you guys for joining us. We will go ahead and talk about our special guest that will be airing with us tonight. And don't forget, you guys, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, just go ahead and put your stuff in the comment section at the bottom. Drop it in the comments if you're on YouTube or Facebook. Drop it on there and we'll display it so you guys can get your questions or comments viewed and answered as well. Again, though, if you do want to email us about a topic or anything, just to email us and want us to be on your podcast or anything, you can email us at finetaylorcousinscrew@gmail.com.
You guys were pretty quiet last week, and I know this is a topic that's not spoken of much, but this is what Tasha and I are here to do, to inform and to let you know about autism like we had at the beginning of the month, and now sarcoidosis. So if you encounter some of this stuff, or people who are encountering, you have support systems and people that you could possibly reach out to and ask questions.
Definitely. And just let them know, steer them to this podcast so they can view previous podcasts and educate themselves or their family members and friends as well. Again, this information is just information. It's not to diagnose anybody. So please go to your provider and get that information done through them. That is our disclosure for this podcast. So again, this is just informational session, okay? Mm-hmm. All right. And tonight we have Dr. Richard Harris, who is a board-certified internal medicine physician and pharmacist. Dr. Harris attended the University of Texas at Austin for pharmacy school, then pursued his medical education at Montgomery School of Medicine in Houston. Dr. Harris is a lifelong learner and completed his MBA at the University of Houston. He is a client-centric view focused on building relationships and trust through a comprehensive lifestyle medicine system. He currently hosts his own podcast, which is called Strive for Great Health and it has several online wellness courses, and he consults for several companies. So guys, go ahead and make sure that you go to his podcast. You can view it on Facebook as well. This is the link at the bottom. It's www.theghwellness.com to support him. He is an avid reader, a weightlifter, a video game enthusiast, and an author in his spare time. We have to ask about being that author. I want to know what books he has out. Dr. Harris is also, he enjoys sports, traveling, and philanthropy, and church, and keto donuts. I gotta know about those keto donuts. How are those? I can't imagine those are good. I'd rather have that. But without further ado, we will have our guests on here, and we very appreciate Dr. Harris for coming on and speaking to us about things, okay? All right, let's bring him in here. Hello there, Dr. Harris.
Hello, Tasha, Tammy. How are you guys?
We're doing great. How are you?
Oh, thank you for having me on the show. I'm doing fantastic.
Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate you being here and supporting us with this information, as well as supporting our podcast as well. So we did do a little bio about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, or how, what made you decide to become a physician and a pharmacist and get your MBA? Like, tell us a little bit more in detail about yourself. And then how did you come about wanting to do your podcast as well?
Sure. So I'm crazy, obviously. I think that's the only way that you could do all of that school. I did, 16 years of higher level education after high school. So a lot of time. But originally, I was all over the place, and I'm still all over the place. I'm a little bit more targeted, but I wanted to be a biomedical physicist. I wanted to design prosthetics and help people that way. Realized I love physics, hated math, switched into biochem, wanted to do research, did research for 2 years, hated it, didn't know what I wanted to do, worked in the dean of the pharmacy school's lab, and he told me, hey, just come to pharmacy school. I think you'll be a good pharmacist. At the time, I had no idea what a pharmacist did, no idea what the job was, knew nothing about pharmacy. And I said, okay. So I applied, got into pharmacy school, figured out my first year of pharmacy school that I wanted to go to medical school. And then I finished pharmacy school, worked as a pharmacist to pay for medical school, went to medical school, realized in residency that I wanted to get my MBA because the business of medicine is just all jacked up. And so I wanted to be able to speak the business lingo. And that's pretty much how I landed in the position I am today. I started the podcast because I got tired of people asking me the same questions over and over again. And it was either write a blog or podcasting. I had some friends who had podcasts, and I said, okay, maybe this podcasting thing will be kind of cool. I like speaking. I don't really like writing, even though I have wrote curricula and I write CE and content for some of my clients. I don't enjoy it. I enjoy speaking. And so I said, okay, I'm going to start a podcast. And lo and behold, almost a year and a half later, podcasting is such a awesome and unique way to connect with people all over the world. I get emails from people in different countries talking about how my podcast has helped them and changed the way they think about health and what is healthy, and empowered them to make some changes in their lives or better their health. And that's really, really rewarding. So now I do very little actual clinical MD work. I have, the online practice and health and wellness courses, but most of the time I'm focused on getting the information out there, because people know more about their cell phones than they do about their own bodies. They know more about how to operate a cell phone than their own bodies. And that's just a travesty. That's a shame. And there's so much conflicting evidence out there about what's healthy and what's not healthy. And maybe I should do this and maybe I should do that. And I just really wanted to clear the air based upon research, not my opinion. It's based upon research on what we should be doing to help maintain our health and wellness.
Thank you for that. That was really interesting. And I do apologize, everyone, for chewing earlier. My sister Kim told me, I can tell you're chewing. But that's really interesting. And I really do thank you for that. And that little blurb about knowing more about your cell phone than you do about your health. We got to do better. We got to do better.
So as a child, did you know that besides you wanted to go into that, or is that something that your parents, are you the first generation of pharmaceutical and MD, or?
I am. My dad was a finance guy, and my mom was a teacher. Oh, stopped teaching before she had me. So she, I always say she was a teacher, but I never knew her as a teacher.
Okay.
Um, I wanted to be a physician when I was a kid. I don't really remember this. My parents showed me a drawing that they had found when I got into medical school. It was a picture that I drew. I don't know how old I was. I was young because I don't remember it. That said, I want to be a physician because I want to help people. And it just came back full circle to that. And now I realize that being a physician doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be at the bedside, because a lot of times in medical school and everything, it's hammered in your head, you're not a real physician unless you're at the bedside. And I said, wait a minute, medicine is more complicated than that. There's more that we can do to help people than just see them one on one. And so I look at this podcast and all the speaking and things like that as a way to change associations and change mindset. And I think that's very important. And then the lifestyle medicine courses is a way for people at their own pace to take in all of this information and begin to slowly make positive changes in their life. And that to me is the essence of being a physician, because I'm still helping people.
So that's really, really great. And I understand that as well, coming in the medical field. As a child, I've always liked helping people, and that's what made me go into becoming a registered nurse. But before then, I used to work as a forest firefighter and liked helping people that were, caught in fires in the forest and helping them rebuild their homes and stuff like that. So I did do a lot of community service through AmeriCorps, actually. So it's a great platform when you have that heart to help, because that's a passion of yours. That way that you're getting the best of the best when someone has a passion about what they do.
Absolutely. And
I'm glad that you shed light on that, Dr. Harris, that being a doctor is more than just bedside. Interestingly enough, you did say that they drill that in you while you're in school, but there's so many other roles that doctors can play. And having worked while I was in college, I worked at Pfizer, and I worked in adverse events. And that was when I got the opportunity to see nurses in a different light, because the nurses would have to decode. I worked on a drug Lipitor, and the nurses would have to decode whatever adverse events would be going on with different people who was taking his drugs based on what the doctors would write. But it was, it was in medical terminology. So you're right. There's so many other ways that you can actually serve in different careers, more than what we see on television or the obvious. So thank you for shedding light on that.
Yes, just speaking of being in the real life. I know earlier today we were discussing about your bedside manners at what you had. Can you tell us a little bit about how you said you decided when you were practicing to kind of calm people down because of that notion that they have about providers, and, being not able to feel like they're talking to somebody who is superior than them?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my colleagues roasted me for this, but I don't wear my white coat. I don't even think I have one in the house. I think I may have the one I have from pharmacy school for symbolic reasons, but that's it. And the reason I don't wear it is because I'm no different than anybody else. Being a doctor is not who I am. And I think a lot of the problem is that it's the only profession that really your identity is your profession. Right? If you have a friend who's a lawyer, you don't go, "What's up, law?" Or if you have a friend who's a firefighter, you don't go, "Hey, what's up, fire?" But if you have a friend who's a doc, what do you say? "Hey, what's up, doc?" Right? And so I wanted to break that notion and say, listen, I'm just a guy. I just happen to go to medical school. I just happen to get certified to do this. But I'm like you, I'm walking through life just trying to figure things out. So if we have an open and honest dialogue, it's going to help us figure things out quicker than if I wear my white coat and lord over you and talk punitively to you and talk down to you. And that's not really going to solve anything. And that was in my mind how I wanted to practice, was just to be a source of knowledge and inspiration rather than an authority figure.
That's great at that aspect. I appreciate you for doing that as well. Like I was saying, that I help and consult with family members to help them because they feel intimidated when they do go to the providers, or if they're at a hospital or being hospitalized, they feel intimidated and don't think about the questions they should ask or forget about it. They don't have that mindset or understand those medical terminologies, as well as sometimes they just be nonchalant with the provider and say, "Oh, I'm not, I'm doing okay." And actuality, they're not. I know you were saying earlier too, as well, that you like when people bring someone who knows them better, because then you get more information from them to help them to be able to consider their plan of care that will be best for their health.
Right. And this happens a lot in the hospital, not as much as outpatient. But I'd be talking to someone in the hospital, and the spouse would be like, "That's not how it is. Why don't you tell them the truth?" and I see that all the time, where people minimize, and they kind of do the ostrich thing, where they're like, "Oh, this will probably go away." I've seen people with tumors the size of footballs, and they said, "Well, why didn't you come in when this first started happening, when it started getting bigger?" It's like, "Oh, I just thought it would go away." And I was like, "It was getting bigger and you thought it would go away." It's just, we oftentimes are in denial about our own symptoms because we're so afraid of hearing bad news. Well,
Yeah.
I want to hear the bad news early, right? Because I know if I hear the bad news early, that means it's early. And the earlier it is, the easier it is to fix. So would you rather be $10 in debt or $10 million in debt? Well, no one goes $10 million in debt overnight, right? That accumulates over time. You might start off $10 in debt, but if you don't change the way you do things, that money is going to continue to grow. And it's the same thing with our health. If you come in when something's a minor concern, then minor concerns hopefully will have very simple solutions and simple fixes. But if you wait, that's when things can get complicated. And the notion that, "Oh, I'm not sick because I don't feel that bad," is completely false. You can have an active volcano erupting inside of you and feel pretty much 80-90%. All right. And that's because our body is really wonderful at compensating until it hits a wall. That's why people are fine, drop dead from a heart attack. That heart attack's been brewing for 15 years. If they looked, they would see it. If they went and got their checkups, they'd have high blood pressure and their blood sugars would be off and their lipid panel would be abnormal and all these screening tests would be abnormal, but they felt fine. So they're like, "Oh, I don't need to go because I feel okay." But, we take our cars in for regular maintenance, even if the car's driving fine, because we know that there are things that we can't feel by just sitting behind the wheel. So we go to an expert who knows what to look for to diagnose these problems before they become big problems. So we do that with our cars, but we don't do that with our bodies.
Just thank you for that. Yeah, because that's what you have to do. If you do maintenance on other stuff, why not do it on your body? And there's preventable measures that you can actually do before anything occurs. For example, you can get your colonoscopy before you find out that you may have cancer in there. At a certain age, get your colonoscopy. You go to the dentist, go get your teeth cleaned before you find out you got cavities. So tune yourself up, get a tune up.
Right. And Tasha, on that note, I always do, once a year. I didn't post it this year. I always tell women it's fashionable after 40 to go get mammograms. As Dr. Harris said, my mom would always have this little saying, because when you said this, it really made me think about my mom. Nothing happens overnight. You were ignoring and coping, and then boom, there's an issue. Don't wait until it's an issue to get to the doctor. It's preventative. If you want to catch it early, before later, right? But if you're going and getting regular checkups, and people is having this whole issue with COVID and vaccinations and things of that nature, and I'm like, people are making a big argument about this, but they won't get a regular checkup. So do the things that are necessary, and we'll worry about that other stuff later, right? But I mean, make sure you're taking care of your daily, your regulars, your OBGYN exams, your mammograms, particularly for women, and particularly of women of color. Don't wait until you're sick to go to the doctor, because that's typically, like Dr. Harris said, is when it's at a bad condition, because now it's surfacing. It's not underneath, it's out.
Right. So we got a little bit of the housekeeping stuff out of the way. We're going to go into our topic of sarcoidosis. I know we were off the topic right here, just starting, getting to know Dr. Harris and letting him give his expertise as far as in, self-care, basically, because that's what it is. It's self-care. So we're going to go on a little bit into about sarcoidosis. As we talked last week, we know that sarcoidosis is an idiopathic disease that can affect any organ. And they are actually granulomas that are in those systems that can affect any part of your organ to cause damage as well. Of course, we know that it is more prevalent in women and women of color as well, but it actually affects all races as well. But if you go early on, you can actually help with these symptoms that you're having. There is no cure for it, but they can help you with the symptoms. Also, it does go into remission. So that means that it stays dormant and can just sit back there, and then something can trigger it where it comes to effect where you'll start having issues with parts of your organs, or, and it can affect you really bad. And that's when people, take heed to it and get preventive measures or be on medications that can help decrease it, as far as like steroids to help with that as well. So Dr. Harris, tell us a little bit about sarcoidosis, and then I guess you can go into what made you decide to actually research more into sarcoidosis as well.
Yeah, so I got first exposed to sarcoidosis when I was in medical school, actually, because I went to medical school in Houston at one of the largest medical complexes in the world. We got to see a little bit of everything. And so in school, you learn about these things that are rare, and then you don't think you'll ever going to see them. And then I saw 6 or 7 patients with sarcoidosis when I was in medical school. And then again, when I was in residency for a while, I actually wanted to be a lung doctor until I got burnt out. And so I did a lot of rotations with the lung doctors. And so I would see about sarcoidosis, and things without answers always fascinate me, because that's when you can do a lot of critical thinking. And sarcoidosis is one of those things. We don't know what really causes it. We know that there's a genetic predisposition. All right. We know that women are more likely to get it, and that's because women are more likely to get autoimmune diseases overall because of hormone profiles. And we know that there are some changes in African Americans that make it more likely to happen. That's probably genetics. It probably has to do with vitamin D. That's just my opinion. I don't know any research on this. But these autoimmune diseases, they're increasing. And we don't really know why. We have some theories, but the rates of sarcoidosis are increasing. And there's a couple reasons why we think autoimmune disease develops. We think it's a multiple failure type of scenario. And what I mean by that is you have a genetic predisposition that all of a sudden gets activated by something. And so that could be an infection. We think a lot of the autoimmune symptoms happen after you get an infection, and that sensitizes the immune system, and then it starts attacking itself. It could be an environmental toxin or an exposure. So you get in the wrong environment that sensitizes your immune system, and it starts attacking itself. It could be other things like brought on by stress or other environmental aspects. We know that stress wreaks havoc on your immune system. So we don't really understand this, and it's still such a rare condition that unfortunately there's not a whole lot of research being done out there. And so the mainstay of treatment right now is Well, let's just throw a bunch of immunosuppressants out there and see what works and what doesn't work. And I think that that's doing people a disservice, because we need to look at some of the other things that we know helps regulate the immune system: exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress management, what's going on in your environment. Is the drinking water that you have safe? What are you eating? Are you eating a lot of processed foods, which have a ton of toxins and inflammatory effects? So we have to ask ourselves, and this is what I do in holistic medicine, is say, okay, I look at how are you interacting with your environment, because most people don't realize the number one determinant of your health. Like, if I knew this one thing about you, I can most accurately predict your health status. You want to know what that one thing is? Zip code.
Tell us, please.
Your zip code. This is how powerful your environment is that the biggest determinant of your health is what zip code you live in, because that tells you so much about your environment. If you're in an urban environment, we know that's more pollution, more toxins, usually more stress. There's a lot of socioeconomic factors there, right? And then certain environments have more, like I said, more toxins. Like here in Katy, Texas, there's a ton of toxins in the environment. It was farmland. What did all the farmland get sprayed with? Roundup. So Katy actually has a really high rate of a rare cancer called mantle cell lymphoma because of the environment. And so these are all the things that we have to look at. And this is why I think something like sarcoid is interesting, because it allows you to think critically. It allows you to look at things from a biochemical perspective and an environmental perspective and try to do what you think is best for the person in front of you, even if we don't have a whole lot of science regarding what's causing this, what's the underlying process. And then, there's no standard go-to treatment as far as medication wise. It's an escalation type thing where you put someone on the lowest level of care that stabilizes their symptoms. And I think that we have seen a lot of people improve with some of these lifestyle measures in autoimmune diseases like sarcoidosis. And I think that's why it's so important for things part of their treatment regimen as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. Just knowing that certain, like you said, environments can affect it as well. Bringing that back to things that I do know, like they thought my grandpa had it as well. And now my older aunt, who is in her 70s, now they diagnosed her with it. So it's like, okay, so she probably had it and they thought it was just asthma. And all of this time, she's never got a CT scan or anything like that to actually, or a bronchoscopy to get a biopsy to see what was going on with her. And they just called it as asthma. And she had, lung damage from her asthma. And that's what I said last week. I actually had a cold. I thought I had a cold, but that cough just kept going and going for, weeks and weeks and a month or two. And I was like, okay, now I need to go back to the doctor, because now it's not a cold. It's something beyond just this cough that's, existing in my body that I have no whereabouts of or know what's going on. But, that's the best thing, is to actually find out what is going on. And, you just never know where you live at. And like you said, zip code has a lot to do with it. That's pretty interesting, because that is true. That is true. Your environment, you can be a product of your environment.
And last week, our guest was from Detroit, and we talked about environmental racism. And we talked about, she was saying how there were high levels of lead in certain zip codes. And we talked about Flint, that whole water crisis. But that's interesting you would say that, because now like the dots are connecting, like, we're on to something. So she definitely said, I really do believe, she was the retired police sergeant, right, Tasha? And the particular, I think, police department where she worked sat on top of a high lead level type of ground. I was like, oh, wow. She's like, the water, So environmental racism is something that's really real. I'm in a doctoral program right now, and we talked about that. And I was saying there was something called Cancer Valley on the Mississippi River, where they had all of these different industries, that oil refineries, and people were dying 5 times more than the average American because of the pollution, the pollution in the air from the refinery. So that is something that's really interesting. But zip code, that is something I will take note of. Thank you again, Dr. Harris. Thank you again.
And then also, we're just going to put this on the screen to let you know, like, these are some of the symptoms that people may have, or the pains that they may have in areas of sarcoidosis that affects their joints as well. So, these are the areas that, people are cognizant to that have sarcoidosis that may have these items as well. Let me take this off. Okay.
And Dr. Harris, can you go back to one thing you said, because it really permeated. You said stress. People don't understand the weight and the physical, the mental, emotional, and the health effects of stress. Can you go right there for me, please?
Yeah, it's crazy in this day and age that we still believe, a lot of people believe, that being stressed has no bearing on their health. And I say, okay, so when you get stressed, is it true or false that your body releases certain chemicals? Oh, well, that's true. There has to be something that my body releases to create the stress response. I'm like, yeah, you're right. And I say, okay, now if your body's releasing chemicals and transmitters and all of that, a reaction is happening. Now, do you think that it might be bad if that reaction is constantly sending stress signals, sending alarm signals? And he said, well, yeah, that might be bad. I'm like, yeah, it is. It actually is. So what happens is your whole system gets dysregulated if you're stressed. Your gut gets dysregulated. Your brain gets dysregulated. In my opinion, what the number one cause of brain fog among Americans is, we're stressed. Constant and chronic stress. It literally makes you dumber. It makes the decision part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, work less. It activates our reptile brain, the amygdala, which is our survival instinct. Why is it that people, when they're stressed, make bad decisions? Because their amygdala is active, and so therefore they're not going to send the decisions they make to the higher level thinking. It's going to stop at the level of the reptile brain. So you're going to make more impulsive decisions and have problems with conflict resolution. And that's what happens when we're stressed. And then think about it this way. How often do you get stressed out about something? Let's say you have an argument with somebody and you wake up the next morning and you say, I have no idea what we talked about last night. What did we even fight about? How often does that happen when you're like, I don't remember what you were upset about. I don't remember what I was upset about. I just remember we were upset. What were we even fighting about? That's stress. That's what stress does to our brains. And then it raises your blood pressure. It raises your heart rate. It raises your blood sugars. It dysregulates your immune system, dysregulates your gut. So chronic stress is one of the root causes of chronic disease. And I have 3 podcasts dedicated to stress because I want people to understand that stress mitigation is not something that's an option. It's an absolute necessity if you want to be healthy. Because if you are, let's say you're stressed and you have sarcoidosis, an autoimmune disorder, where your immune system's already dysregulated, and then stress dysregulates your immune system, you're literally adding fuel to the fire. And this has been proven. There's data on this. It's well documented that chronic stress exacerbates chronic disease. It can lead to chronic disease. It can worsen chronic disease. And so for people who have an autoimmune disease, it's even more important that they begin to change their associations, change how they think about things, and then do some stress mitigation techniques, meditation, yoga, tai chi, breathing exercises. One of the things I tell people is, and sounds funny, but it actually works. So what I want you two to do with me is just do this. Now, how do you feel?
It actually feels soothing to yourself.
Right. I'm like comforted.
It feels comforting, right? And so our body Even if we know we're touching ourselves, we're rubbing our own arms, you get a release of the happy brain chemicals. And so these are simple techniques you can do, and there's a whole bunch of them when you're stressed to help yourself de-stress. And so this is something that I work with my clients on, that I talk about, because it's so important that we really work to de-stress, because life is very stressful in this day and age, especially when you look at the media and politics and social unrest and all of these things going on. And it's meant to draw your attention. It's meant to be, that clickbait type of thing, right? And it's meant to stir up emotions. But we have to realize that that's not in our best interest, and then do things to help soothe ourselves, calm ourselves, and center ourselves.
Wow, that's great information there. And that is something else that we have brought on. We have brought on a massage therapist, and let people know that getting a massage is good to do. Going to a counselor. We had a counselors on here. To talk to a counselor is good to release.
Right.
Our purpose is, self-care as well. And Bonetta Harris actually is on here now. And she was actually one of our guests on here, who is a massage therapist, talking about getting your massage and the things that it relieves. And she's had several people come to her with issues, and it is not the massage, it's something else. So she sends them to the doctor like, no, this has nothing to do with your muscles and your tension. That's actually something medical going on.
Or the reverse. They think it's something and they just needed a good stress release massage. She's like, because like when I was going, I told you my hands were tight, and I thought, I'm like, self-diagnosing. Maybe you have arthritis. No, it's tension in my hands. She was like, your tension goes to your hands. So again, don't self-diagnose. As Tasha said, you're hearing these things, go to a doctor. If you work and you pay insurance and you have these co-pays, go. If they pay for therapy, I go. Just go and talk to somebody. Talking to someone that's not going to judge you is therapeutic. It really is.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes there's two things I say about therapy. One, I think everybody should go through therapy. Right?
Absolutely.
There's nothing weak. So here in America, we are such an individualistic society that we view doing something as a collective as weakness. Yet we idolize team sports. Talk about cognitive dissonance there, right? What do we love team sports more than individual sports here in America.
Mm-hmm.
But we prioritize individualistic merits, right? And so we say, that's weak to go talk to somebody. No, it's weak to keep it in, because it's easier. It's easier to keep it in than it is to go talk to somebody. So what's the weaker option? It's the easier option.
Yes.
So the real strength is saying, I need help, and going to get help. That's real strength. And it's great to get things out of our head, because sometimes you just need to say something out loud, and you'll be like, oh man, that's really stupid. Why did I think that?
Yes.
I mean, how many times have we done that, where something we thought, and then we said it out loud, and you're saying it and you want to pull it back, because you're like, this is way different coming out of my mouth than it was in my head.
Yes, definitely. You can't take it back.
Right. And I think I was laughing when you said something. I'm like, that's a t-shirt. Stress makes you dumb. And it was funny that you said, how many times have you argued? And you're like, well, what were we arguing about? Yeah, because you're just blurting out things and with no type of filters, because you're stressed out. If if you're not talking to people, all the things that they consider weak causes stress.
We have a question from one of our audience. Let's see what she has. We have Miss Barbara on here, Barbara Christian. Hi, Miss Barbara. She's a very supportive person since day one of our podcast. We started in October 5th, actually, of last year, and she has definitely been our number one viewer here. We enjoy Miss Barbara supporting us. Thank you again. And her question for this evening is, what are some of the breathing techniques to help with stress?
Sure. So my favorite is something called diaphragmatic breathing. And diaphragmatic breathing, or belly breathing, is just what it sounds like. So most of us breathe with our chest muscles. And that's not really how we were designed to breathe. Our diaphragm is a large muscle that separates our chest cavity from our abdominal cavity. And what happens when we breathe is it moves up and down. And so belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing engages that muscle. And it's been shown to actually improve relaxation, decrease blood pressure, decrease heart rate. And it's super easy to do. You just, instead of taking a breath in and out with your chest, do it with your belly. And then you're moving the diaphragm in and out, and you can notice a big difference. And that's one of my favorite breathing techniques. There's other ones like the alternate nostril breathing, where basically you breathe in one nostril, close it, breathe out the other nostril, and then keep repeating that. There's the what's his name, Andrew Weil, I think, technique is another breathing technique. There's another one, 953 breathing, I believe that's what it's called. So there's multiple different breathing techniques that you can easily look up. And then there are people on Instagram who just do, this is what they do. They just talk to you about breathing and show you breathing techniques. And I put some of these in my wellness courses. You know, I'm not a breathwork expert, but I do have some friends that are. There's a company here in Houston called BreatheFit, BreatheFit, and they post a lot of videos online about what techniques to better your breathing, whether that's for exercise or just for stress relaxation.
Let's just say, Tasha's, I'm sure she's working on posting this stuff. Take advantage of this. This is like free information. Dr. Harris, I'm definitely, for myself, I'm interested in knowing your podcasts that talk about stress, because I'm always talking about this to friends and family members. And like you said, this is for centuries and years, people feel like, oh no, stress doesn't affect. No, it does. It makes you dumb.
Mm-hmm. And this stuff is so important for people with sarcoid, right? Because since we don't know the underlying mechanism why people develop all these granulomas, you have to do as much as you can to help balance the system. And like we've talked about, that's stress, that's getting enough sleep, that's maintaining hydration, that's eating the right foods. This is the question I get asked the most. Well, what should I eat? Because there's conflicting advice out there. And so you can talk to 5 different nutritional specialists and they'll tell you 5 different things, right? You should be keto, you should be paleo, you should be pescatarian, you should be vegan, you should be vegetarian, you should be carnivore. Well, the answer is there's no one size fits all when it comes to nutrition. Right. There isn't. But I tell people there's 5 principles. 1, eat 90% of your foods from single ingredient, nutrient dense foods. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
You don't need a label to know what blueberries are. You don't need a label to know what chicken is. You don't need a label to know what salmon or cod are. You know what, you look at it and be like, oh, that's a sweet potato.
Right.
Right? But I challenge people, go into your kitchen, look at the foods you eat the most, look at the box, and see if the box says there's more chemicals in your food than actual food. Because if you have ingredients in your food that you need a PhD in biochemistry to know what it is, you shouldn't be eating it.
Right. Right.
You just shouldn't. And so 90% from single ingredient foods. Number 2, don't drink your calories, eat your calories. If God wanted us to drink apples, he would have made apples in the form of juice. Wow. But he didn't. We need to eat our calories. There are changes in the body that happen. Like, a lot of people think juicing is healthy, and it depends. So if I go buy a store-bought juice, I'm just gave myself a 50-gram bolus of sugar. That's not healthy. And also, they remove the pulp, and you don't know, in the processing through the heat and the chemicals and stuff like that, the nutrients are removed. So if you're going to juice, which I don't typically recommend, make it yourself. You can get a blender at home. And what you want to do is you want to make it 80% veggies, 20% fruit. But you also want to throw in protein powder. And that can be, pea protein or hemp protein or, whey or whatever. And you want to throw in some good fats. So that could be an avocado or MCT oil or coconut oil. And the reason is you want to make it look as much like a meal as possible. So the protein and the fats slow down the absorption of the sugar. So you start to mimic what you're doing with a meal. Okay. That's really important. So the third thing is seed oils are not heart healthy. And that's like canola oil. That's like um, grapeseed oil, all that kind of stuff. If you're cooking, just cook with olive oil. If you're going to take anything, just use extra virgin olive oil. It's
Yep.
stable to heat. It has lots of benefits. You can also use butter, ghee. The animal fat products are stable. And then avocado oil is another one that people will use as well. And so that's something. The fourth thing is you don't need to eat 6 times a day. Human beings were actually meant to go through cycles of fasting and feeding, right? And so you can shorten your feeding window, and this is the intermittent fasting that people hear, to that 16-8 type of method, because that actually does help. And there's a lot of benefits associated with fasting. I have a whole podcast on it. But unless you're Michael Phelps, you don't need to eat 6 times a day.
Oh, wow.
Right. And the only person who benefits from you eating 6 times a day is the food companies. They're the ones who benefit. That's it. Yeah.
True.
And then the fifth thing is eat the rainbow. And this is so important. Most people say, you know what, I can't do this nutrition thing because I can't limit myself. I have to keep all my possibilities open. And I say, okay, well, write down for me everything that you eat in a normal week. It's like 10 foods,
Wow.
right? We like the idea of freedom more than we actually like freedom. We're creatures of habit. So the data shows that most people get 80% of their calories from 15 foods. That's it. But we need to eat different colors of foods because that's the different nutrient profiles. That's the different antioxidants. And if you have sarcoidosis, it's really important to make sure that you're getting a lot of antioxidants through your fruits, through your vegetables, and that you're not getting stuff that promotes inflammation, like seed oil, like processed foods, because that's going to further dysregulate your system. You're going to need stuff that's good for your gut. Some of the fiber and those types of things are beneficial for our gut bacteria. And then you're going to need things that to make sure that our immune system is doing well, like vitamin D, like omega 3s. So these are all tie in to the underlying process of sarcoidosis, which is immune dysregulation. And so having the right nutrition plan helps regulate your immune system. And notice I didn't say diet. I don't believe in diets. I've never
Right.
had a diet in my entire life. All right. I still eat donuts. I still eat cake. I still eat these other things, Snickers bar. I just don't do it when my body's craving it. I plan for it.
Okay.
Right. Well, let's say like we have a plan for our budget, right? So
Right.
you drive past the store and you don't stop in every store that you drive past and buy everything
Right.
because you'd run out of money. But people do this with their food all the time. They'll see something and be like, oh, that looks good. I'll just take it. But you need to have a plan. And so I tell people, don't deny yourself anything because that's never going to work. If you say, I'm never going to eat another donut again, you have a 100% fail rate on that.
Yes, already.
But plan for it. I have a cheat meal every 4 to 7 days. And so when I get a craving for something, I say, okay, I'm not denying myself this. I'm delaying it to when I have planned for it, when I have budgeted for it. Just like you budget for other purchases, you need to budget for those things in your nutrition plan. And you need to have a plan. It drives me insane that people don't have a plan. You can go ask anybody, what's your plan for, what's your financial plan? They'll tell you some stuff. You can ask them, what's your plan for how you want to raise kids? They'll tell you, what's your plan for how you want to retire? What's your plan for how you want to advance in your job? What's your plan for your health? Crickets.
Yeah.
Every single time, crickets. And so we need to have a plan for that as well. And that's how you succeed.
Vanetta has a question. Is it based on the size of the meal if eating 6 times a day?
So again, unless you're an athlete who's working out 8 hours a day, you don't need to be eating 6 times a day. You just don't. It's not what our bodies were designed to do. And there's actually evidence that shows that there's something called the thermic effect of food. So we need calories to burn calories, right? And so the thermic effect of food is actually higher when you eat larger meals. It makes us work harder to burn those calories. And then you're also looking at things like insulin response and giving your gut a break. If you're eating 6 times a day, even if it's small meals, your gut is constantly working. It takes 2 to 4 hours for food to get through your stomach and 6 to 8 hours for food to get through your intestines. So if you eat right before you go to bed and you eat right when you wake up, you've got food moving through you at all times. Your gut doesn't get a break. Wow. So I really say there's no benefit to eating that often. One of my mentors is a guy who was number 5 in the world in 2015, 2014 in the CrossFit Games. He's in his 40s. The guy front squats like 450 pounds. He's an absolute monster. He eats once a day. That's it. If he gets hungry, he snacks on some berries and nuts. But he eats once a day. So there's no real need to eat that frequently. It's not what we were designed to do. Again, our ancestors went through cycles where food was plenty and then when food was sparse. Right. And so our bodies are actually designed to enter fasting cycles. Look at every society, pre-modern society. They talked about fasting. They talked about meditation. All the religions talk about fasting and meditation. These are things that we just knew that we had to do that were beneficial that we just suddenly stopped recently. And so you can see a dramatic improvement pretty quickly with just shorten your eating window and start meditating.
And Dr. Harris, I will definitely attest to that because about 3 weeks to a month ago, I started doing intermittent fasting. And I'm like, not that I didn't know this, but when you start doing things again, you're like, we really do eat out of habit. And even at my 12 o'clock hour from 12 to 8, because I won't eat, I'll eat between the hours of 12 to 8. So I'm telling people I don't just eat between 12 and 8 because I can. I'm literally eating one meal. And then I'm like, you know what? We don't give our bodies a time to rest. And you eat because you're saying, oh, it's this time to eat. And this is why obesity is probably so prevalent in our societies because we eat out of habit, not because we're hungry. And then I was on another podcast with a young lady. She said, it takes 20 minutes for your brain to tell your stomach that you've eaten. So in her house, she took out all the big plates and she don't allow her children to eat. Like if you had a plate, then you wait 20 minutes because now I need your mind to process to your stomach that you've eaten and then you won't overeat.
We have another
question. And slow down, right? We eat too fast. And that dysregulates some things as well. We weren't meant to eat that fast because real food is tougher to eat, right? It's a lot harder to chew and digest broccoli than it is to chew and digest a potato chip. So these processed foods were meant to be more palatable, to make it so it is easier for you to eat. So you literally can consume more of them per unit of time.
Wow.
And because of that, it makes you more likely to overconsume. And just like you talked about, we eat a lot of times out of boredom. And I always tell people, when you go to the fridge, ask yourself, would I eat broccoli right now? And if the answer is no, you are not hungry. If the answer is, yeah, dog, pass me that broccoli, you are hungry, eat.
That is so true.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. I never thought about that in that aspect of things. But yes, I actually, introduced myself into, okay, you want to eat something that's bad, but get the apple instead. So that's what I do. And actually, that's another thing that I have learned to do is learn about what's in foods and post to them. I actually post them on my Facebook page now and just learn about BHT that they use to keep stuff fresh. It's not good for you. It's bad for your immune system and it triggers certain things. So I'm looking at the cereal, the Cheerios, which Cheerios don't have it in there now. And I'm like, okay, that's not in that. It's not in this. And I learned that UK and other countries don't allow these preservatives and these ingredients in their food. But here in the United States, we do. And that's what's making people sick. Didn't even know that the word carcinogenic is in milk. I was like, so carcinogen, that has something to do with cancer. And so when I researched and found out about the milk, I was like, well, let me go on the refrigerator and just look at my milk. and see what milk I drink. And when I looked at the ingredients in the milk, carcinogen was in there. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me that I've been drinking this milk and it has cancer-like products in here. I got rid of the milk, of course, and research, what milk is. Actually, it's almond. Almonds, if you do the almond, you can drink that as your milk instead of using regular milk. So like I did last week, I challenge people, go and look on my page. It's James and Tasha Dawkins, and I'll post things about certain foods that have all those ingredients that Dr. Harris was saying. If there's so many words in there and you can't even pronounce it, like it has to be bad for you.
But Tasha, on that note, right, when you're talking about milk, someone said to me, and I'm lactose sensitive. I can't do the milk stuff, right? So I do drink almond milk. Someone said no other species drinks milk from someone else other than humans. The goat doesn't drink human milk after it nurses from its mother. No, like it's not good. And I mean, I guess, you do need the vitamin D, but back to something that Dr. Harris said, and one of my guys would say this, Tim, you just want something crunchy. Go get an apple instead of a potato chip. I'll be like, be quiet. So sometimes I think it's just those cravings that we have. But that's a good one to think about, Dr. Harris. Would you eat broccoli if you just go to the refrigerator and we eat relentlessly without even really wanting to eat? You're just gluttonous.
Yeah.
And, it's okay to have sweets. Dark chocolate is sweet.
Yeah. The cocoa is really good for you.
It is. Fruit.
It might taste bitter to you because you're used to the sweet chocolate that has no sugar in it.
Right. But you get used to it. And, I tell people, if I want something sweet, what I do is I grab some almond butter or peanut butter, melt some dark chocolate, mix it together, and put a little honey, a little cinnamon in it, a little vanilla extract. Or I'll get some pecans that I roast myself, in my Instapot, and I put honey over them. That's super sweet. It cuts your sweet cravings for sure.
Just speaking to James has a question. He said, so Dr. Harris, is it only medicine that can put sarcoidosis in remission, or is there other things you can do? Actually, medication don't put it into remission. Correct?
Yeah,
Dr. Harris?
It's, I've seen it both ways, right? I've seen people get in remission on meds, and it's basically whatever the issue. So if medications work for you, the medication solved whatever particular issue it was that your body had. We're still not at the point where we can pinpoint, you have diabetes because of this, and you have it because of this, and you have it because of that. We know that that's the case. We know that disease isn't one size fits all. So if the medication actually works for you, then it's because we just happen to find that it worked for your physiology. But I've seen people go into remission from lifestyle changes alone. I work with a sarcoidosis group, and we talk to sarcoidosis patients, and the ones who have seen a functional medicine or integrative medicine physician were able to sometimes completely get off medication or get down to the lowest toxic medication, or replace that medication with some herbals or things like that do very similar things. So I always tell people, as a pharmacist, I love the mechanism of action of medications. But if you're just depending on medications to solve your problem, that's not how they work. That's not. This is what I tell people. Let's look at statins, right? Lipitor, the drug that you worked on, right? $1 billion blockbuster drug. The absolute risk reduction, meaning if I have 100 people, how many people is this going to save? In studies is between 3 to 9. So if you have 100 people take it, 3 to 9 of them are going to not have that primary endpoint, which is a heart attack or stroke or something like that. So that means that 91% of people taking it's going to do absolutely nothing for. So if I'm sitting in an office with a patient and I tell them this, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy and say, well, give me something that works. But if I'm taking care of 100 million people and I can save 3 million or 9 million, I'm going to do that every single time. So there's a difference between the macro level of medication and the micro level of medication. And if medication worked, the average 65-year-old wouldn't be on 12 to 16 medications. Right? If you just needed medication, then you would just need 1 or 2 and that would solve the problems. So don't just depend on medication. And we see this all the time. People are like, I don't need to eat healthy. I'm on Lipitor.
Right. Or they say I don't have high blood pressure because I'm on blood pressure medicine. Like,
and this was like some 15 years ago. That drug was terrible, let me just say. And I was telling my mom, I'm like, if you're on it, get off of it, because the adverse events, it was bad. I remember having to type this, and I was in college, and I would type the adverse events into the system. I'm like,
Yeah, if you look at it, the actual benefits and the risks of it are pretty much the same. If you look at the data, you know, it's harming as many people as it's helping because of the risks and the side effects. So
I live in New Jersey, and I know that big pharma is a big old business, right?
Yep. You got to think about it. If you eat healthy, what's the harm in that? If you eat more blueberries, what's the harm in that? If you meditate, what's the harm in that? If you get more exercise, what's the harm in that? If you know, get a water filtration system in your house, what's the harm in that? I mean, there's some monetary costs up front, but it's going to save you way more money on the back end by preventing disease. Prevention costs money, but so does disease, and the disease costs hundreds of times more than the prevention.
In your life, it costs your life. So, you know,
I was on a Zoom call for teenagers for high school last week, and one of the panelists said, I always tell my son, you're going to pay either on the front end or you're going to pay on the back end. And when you pay on the back end, you pay with interest. So that's how you have to think about your health. You know, it's your health is wealth. And I say this not in a cliche manner, but how many people have money and cars and land? If you're not well and you cannot enjoy it, it's pointless. But we are definitely at the hour in 2 minutes.
We are. It went by so fast. And just to piggyback, when you're younger, just because you're young, you think you can eat all those unhealthy things, you're going to pay for it in the long run. So, you know, teach children now, younger, to eat healthy and put those, you know, healthy habits and little snacks in them that they eat more fruits and vegetables, even though they don't like it. I know people say, I don't want to force my children to eat it, but you know, you have to get their palate changed. Once you change their palate, they will like those things.
And you can puree it.
Yeah.
And they don't even know what they're eating. If you have all the machines like Tasha, you have, when the baby comes, you can puree it. But once you start them out and drinking water, I remember when I was keeping Savannah and I would give her water. I'm not just going to keep dosing her with milk. You know, she wasn't being breastfed. No, she's going to take water. And I'm not putting any sugar in it. And she got to the point she would just drink water, you know.
Yeah.
Right. 100 years ago, kids didn't have the option. They ate what was given to them or they starved. Right.
Correct.
So
I grew up in that age.
Yeah, me too. My grandma was like, you either eat this or you eat nothing. And
my mother would say, eat it or wear it.
Right. And you eat nothing for a couple of days in a row, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I'm going to eat this because I'm starving. And then you're like, oh, it doesn't taste as bad as I thought it did.
Exactly.
It actually tastes pretty good.
That's the thing. We give children choices now. They don't want to eat their vegetables. Okay. No, that's not okay.
You don't get choices when you're not paying bills and you're not working. So that's always been my motto. Like, are you working? Are you providing? Right.
I think someone had on here that I'm going to post the last question was about your chocolate recipe, I guess. And I think you said it was dark chocolate, honey, and cinnamon.
Yeah. So I take usually almond butter. And then I'll take dark chocolate and a little bit of heavy cream. And I'll melt the dark chocolate in the heavy cream, mix it with the almond butter, put a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla extract in there. And it's almost like a chocolate almond butter pudding.
Wow. So one more thing before we go, and I keep saying that, I know, but about your book. Did you tell me that you have published a book already?
So it's not actually published because the books I've written are curricula. They are available on Amazon, but it's not like a book. But I am working on a book. One of these days I'll get it out there.
And so on Amazon, how can they find this information that you say you have? It's actually on Amazon. So it's maybe like a curriculum about, what is it about?
Oh, it's not health and wellness. It's about social emotional learning.
Social and emotional learning. Wow.
So for the educators who may want something like that, you can probably get into that, right?
Yeah, you can just look for our company, New Spectrum Educational Consultants.
Okay, awesome. Well,
It's been a pleasure, Dr. Harris, and I would love to have you back. It's just really good to hear about medical or medicine from a different perspective, and I've always been into preventative. I'm like, I don't want to be, this is my thing. I'm like, me and diabetes don't need to have anything to do with each other ever. So anytime I'm in a space where it's over, I feel like I'm getting overweight, let me scale back, because once you go there, sometimes there's no returning. But thank you so much for all of your knowledge, and prayerfully we can get that some of your information up about your podcast, because I definitely will listen, especially about stress.
I actually put it on here. Let me just find it. I gotta
Thanks,
find
Cousin Yvette.
I put some stuff on here about his podcast. If I can find it, here we go. So, guys, if you want to get onto Dr. Harris' podcast, you can actually go to this link. It's www.theghwellness.com. He is also on Facebook, and it's called the Great Wellness. What is it?
Great Health and Wellness.
Great Health and Wellness.
Yeah.
I didn't want to mess it up. I'm actually on there as well. And Fine Tail, our podcast, we're actually following you too. So I've actually been up there listening to some of your podcasts as well, and finding very informational for me as well, and for me to pass on things that I've learned as well. So I thank you. I thank you for everything that you have done, your inspiration to getting this information out to everybody, and just your spirit, not to just be that doctor, that pharmacist. You're doing it because you want to help people in the aspect of not just pushing meds or pushing that you're a provider. You're pushing that you have a love for people and want them to become healthy and do preventive measures.
That's me in a nutshell.
I get it, right?
And you look like us, so that makes it even better.
Well, we thank you guys. We thank you for listening and tuning in. Again, this was episode 24, Sarcoidosis Awareness. We just like you to make sure that you get on here and subscribe, like, and share on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. We're on. It says Fine and Taylor. And if you have any guests or any comments or anything, and you want to shoot us an email, you can do that as well. We do have our email here. And let me just put that on there. That's our email if you guys want to do that. Bring a friend on, have them listen to it. Share our podcast on your Facebook page, or, just plaster it on there so people can learn about this information, just as well as Dr. Harris' podcast. Go and support each other. That's what we need. We need support from each other. We are stronger when we're together. And thank you. Good night. You have been
Fine and Taylor. Thanks again, Dr. Harris.
All right. Thank you, guys.